Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Jacobs. I'm a consultant at 7 League, and I'm a sports broadcaster with various people such as ESPN and BT Sport, and the latter's probably going to come in good use this afternoon because I am going to shout, or in commentary terms, speak from the diaphragm and try and reach the gentlemen and ladies at the back as well. We're going to be talking a little bit about accelerating digital performance, and in particular, the tactics that a sports team may use to try and gain various assets such as engagement, reach, and revenue. And I'll come into that in a little bit more detail over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. And a sports team, ironically, is basically dealing with this pub here at Lord's in the sense that their fans are loud, very loud, even louder. They're contentious, they're drunk, they're hungry, they're mad, they're vocal, they're outspoken, and somewhere in this sort of cacophony of noise across the digital landscape, what we're trying to do is streamline a digital strategy that results in goals, but those goals within a sports infrastructure are not necessarily clear because the marketing department, as many of you will know, working in marketing departments, are inevitably saying, hey, revenue is everything, let's focus on branded content. The editorial department are inevitably saying, well, hang on a minute, we want a clear message that has integrity and a resonance with our fans. And perhaps a newer or smaller or growing club is like, how do we do either of those things without first building our audience and gaining the necessary numbers to focus on something like retention? So we're going to be looking at some of the different tactics and showing you a few case studies. I want to just start though by playing this video, which hopefully is loud enough.
Aguero! Oh, Messi!
Baba, ya Baba, ya Baba, ya Baba!
He's turned the tie around all by himself. Kane! Well, he's got another one. Ronaldo! Ronaldo! Cristiano Ronaldo! Another chapter in the incredible story of this little man. Salah! Oh! An utter humiliation.
So the video effectively shows you that when you're a sports club looking for engagement, you can take sport outside of its usual context, and increasingly we're seeing trends within the industry that a sports club, in order to build an audience, is having to think much more creatively in order to not only gain engagement, but meet various internal deliverables that also dictate that that sports club in this modern digital era have to look into new genres. So a sports club might have to be humorous. A sports club might have to react to the socio-political climate. A sports club may have to involve itself in topics such as inclusion or LGBTQ rights. And as a consequence, their editorial and commercial strategies on digital platforms have changed over really the course of the last decade. But year on year on year, it's moving faster than a lot of them can keep up. And our role at 7 League is to emphasize to those sports clubs first and foremost that they must never take their audience for granted. So digital-only companies, perhaps like Copper 90 or the newly launched Athletic, they've always been digital publishers, and they know the worth of things like OTT. They know all of the geeky stuff like bounce back rates and exit percentages, and they don't take their audience for granted. But if you're, say, Liverpool or Manchester United or a cricket club running a social channel, you would naturally assume that you're not going to lose your hardcore fans, but you can be a little bit lazy in your digital strategy as a consequence because you take that audience for granted. So the 7 League vision is to bring people and clubs specifically together by improving the digital experience of sport and ultimately bringing these organizations closer to their fans. And these are some of the clients that we work with, including a large proportion of Premier League clubs, individual clubs like Arsenal, Leicester. We've done digital strategy for Barcelona, and each one is obviously a very different bag. So some clubs that we work with, like Leicester City, were looking to maximize a new audience after they won the English Premier League. Barcelona, on the other hand, have a localization strategy where they feel that they've nailed it in Spanish to a Spanish-speaking audience, but what they haven't done is tapped into the Latino Spanish-speaking audience in North America, or they haven't localized their content in English, in Arabic, in French, and that's sometimes where we come in. So over the next sort of 10 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through a few case studies. This is the sort of internet, like I said earlier, a bit like this pub that we're dealing with. We're dealing with in 60 seconds millions of things, from people trying to find their latest date on Tinder to taking a selfie whilst listening to a boring person talk at a conference on Snapchat, to buying something online. And somewhere in all of this, you've got to grab your attention. And I think the one takeaway from this particular slide that I would give you is, if you are in a business looking for engagement, bear in mind that a lot of the data that perhaps you've seen over the last decade is now quite old-fashioned, in the sense that we always used to talk about, are people going to stay on our website or app for a long period of time? Are they going to engage with us in more than one article? And clubs now actually are moving towards it's more about the latest mentality than let's focus on immersion across the board. So if your bounce back rates or exit percentages are poor, that's not as important as if perhaps you're bringing somebody to your website or whatever your platform is where your message is via your social. So here tells you that we're dealing with low attention spans. And as a consequence, the old data from 5 or 10 years ago is not necessarily as relevant. So it's more important that you fixate someone with a message than all of your content or all of your messages as far as a sports club is concerned. So Barcelona will be keener to get you to click onto their team news and then off their team news. And at that point, they're not strategically trying to get you to read 10 other things or watch 5 or 6 videos, because they appreciate that all of this is going on at the same time. So when we come up with consulting models at 7 League, we offer up sports clubs what we call the 7 League 7. Those of you that are very alert will realize there's actually 8 things here, but digital DNA is underpinning the other 7. So we are effectively telling a sports club 7 strategic things when they choose to frame a digital strategy: their business needs and their audience needs, which is relatively common sense, and identity. And that identity on digital, when a sports club has a strategy, can be completely different to the identity on the field or in the boardroom. And many of you will have seen social clubs and content, even if they're not from a club that you support, that you think has that balance between here's our identity on the field, whereas off it, we're completely different. And AS Roma and FC Bayern Munich are probably the 2 most famous versions of that. And if you're unfamiliar with AS Roma, go to their English digital platforms and you'll see a humorous tone of voice, a quirky tone of voice, a creative tone of voice, and even a non-football tone of voice that doesn't really marry with the Italian voice or the Italian football team, but it works for them. So after we've established what do you want in a business, who do you actually want your audience to be, and what is your identity and tone, we then move on to the basics really of any business: the resource needed, how to plan around that resource, where the data fits in, and then afterwards, what is the metrics and means of monitoring. And it's these last 2 really that a lot of businesses perhaps tend to forget, particularly the metrics and the monitoring. How are you actually going to ensure that you not only create a strategy, but aside from just occasionally looking at data, you set the correct metrical KPIs to know whether you've actually had any success from that strategy. So then the success of the strategy is often framed around what we like to call the 3 R's, which is reach, retention, and revenue. And it's really easy to think as a sports club or as any individual, well, of course we want all 3. But like I said at the very beginning, you can't jump to solid revenue unless you've got reach to begin with, because your content isn't worth as much if your audience is a lot smaller. And similarly, if your audience isn't engaging and isn't coming back to you and isn't hooked on your website or your social or any digital platform, they become less likely to then buy something from you if that is your end goal. And again, they become less likely to watch things like branded content. And again, based on our models, it will have a lower value. And obviously, when we ask a business to score these, we don't just allow you to score them out of 10. We give you 15 points and ask you to weight them accordingly. So this is a major European football club and how they scored it when they came to us. And quite surprising for a major European football club, because this is very high and they already had over 4 million followers across most of their digital platforms. So the RRR strategy gives you a framework, and we'll ask everybody within a sports club to score this privately first. And often the first lesson that we learn is that nobody in any department has the same goals. So internal alignment at a sports club is the first problematic aspect, because the marketing department, as I said earlier, will obviously want that a lot higher and that a lot lower. And the editorial department will only be focused on these, because ultimately branded content is a bit of an inconvenience for them. But your strategy, even if you want all 3, has to be shaped around one of these first to make it coherent and focused. So then in terms of examples of some of these that we've done at 7 League, this was a project around FIFA and some of the individual national teams around the Women's World Cup. We did the Legends Assemble campaign, which was a superheroes campaign launching the beginning of the FIFA Women's World Cup. It involved men and women to allow for more reach, which was one of their fundamental deliverables, to gain a bigger audience around the Women's World Cup. And it was multi-language as well, which meant that the players we picked had to be very diverse. And it didn't really matter, because of the localization strategy, if one was known and respected in China and had no real audience in the UK. It was more about segmenting the talent we had to ensure that every region felt that somebody male and female leapt out to them. So the results of this campaign, 2.4 million video views across various social platforms. Weibo was a really big one in China. Some of the newer platforms like TikTok proved very popular as well. A number of engagements. Feel free, like I say, to either take a photo. If you want to read this in more depth, then I can obviously send you a copy of the slides. So I won't go through each of the results point by point, but you can clearly see some of the pertinent details behind there. And ultimately what this did is a twofold approach. It elevated the Women's World Cup before the tournament, and it left them with a retained audience after it. And each of those retained audiences then, country by country, moved over strategically to the individual countries. So we not only built FIFA and the Women's World Cup handle an audience, but also the individual countries within the FIFA Women's World Cup as well. Then, of course, we work with big European clubs. Juventus wouldn't be as interested in reach, but they would want commercial growth and some form of retention growth strategy as well. So we work with Juventus since 2014. We did a digital audit of their operations in order to find out where some of the holes were in their digital framework. And that was often things like miscommunication between departments, so branded content never got facilitated. That was a poor sourcing of metrics, which means that by not monitoring anything, they simply didn't have a clue where their audience actually lay. And it actually transpired that their audience digitally during games was actually not in Italy. Italy was only the 11th most engaged area globally for Juventus when Juventus were playing. Partially because a lot of Juve fans are just watching it on TV. It might be, of course, across digital platforms, but it's not through Juve's platform. Some of them are obviously at the game. So actually, Malaysia was number 1. And they were like, whoa, we don't really do anything in Asia. So then suddenly, strategically, you've used your data analytics to redefine a map and that map gives you a localization strategy. Other things that we did with them were offer them best practices and new platforms, and also just ensure that if you're going to compete for the Champions League up here, your digital operations have to have a clear personality, a clear audience. You have to do more than just Italian. And you have to also know, like a lot of football clubs don't, how to be sort of magnanimous in defeat. So if you take big football clubs, Spurs lost the other night 7-2 to Bayern. Sorry if there's any Spurs fans listening at the moment. But you lose 7-2, you're used to winning. How do you react to that on digital? Barcelona, when they lost that astonishing game and we were working with them to Paris Saint-Germain, and then they followed up and they won at the Camp Nou and scored about 3 goals in the last minute. When they lost the first leg 4-0, they did 1 tweet. When they won the second leg in injury time, they did 46 tweets. And there has to be a strategy that allows you to tell a story regardless of a result on the field, because this is what your fans actually want. And that might mean being self-mocking. And again, the likes of Roma and Bayern are much better at that than actually some of the bigger clubs. So again, have a quick read of the results of this campaign. It looks like the font's gone a bit skewed there, so apologies for that. But again, I can send you these slides. And we're also supported, I should say here, by the Mailman Group as well, who are our China-based agency. So 7 League operates in Europe and North America. Mailman operates in China and the APAC region. So we have a global presence that allows us, with like a Juve, to offer them Mandarin or Latino audiences in North America, or English speaking as well. And then we do internationalization strategies as well. So this was a project that we did with the Premier League and various Premier League clubs as well. And we went to 200 different territories and over 4.7 billion people. And essentially, we worked to promote PremierLeague.com in various different languages, because the Premier League realised that as they were expanding into different territories with broadcast rights, their digital was falling behind. And again, the end results here was a localization plan, which I think I've sort of already alluded to, and evidence-based recommendations on products and services. So in terms of those products and services, because it's sort of really easy when you hear these talks to just hear, oh, data, oh, products, oh, services, oh, formats. And in each region, they, of course, differ. So if we're talking about Asia, there's absolutely no point in thinking of Facebook and YouTube in China doesn't exist. You kind of have this thing called Douyin, which is the equivalent. And then you've got TikTok and you've got Weibo. In Europe, Twitter is irrelevant to Germans. They just don't use it, which is why Bayern have chosen to have a North American and English-speaking Twitter, because that's the audience there. So knowing your platform is obviously really essential. And the Premier League clubs haven't thought about this, because Premier League clubs, we're English, we're notoriously arrogant around football. We invented the game, despite what Scotland or others say. And as a consequence, if you're Manchester United, apart from perhaps Asia, you don't really think about North America. You don't really think about Germany, Spain, Italy. We're Manchester United. We do it the Manchester United way. We make a profit. We make enough money as it is. So there's a whole scope here to delve into new territories and new languages, but you have to know your platform. And this is basically the platform that you're dealing with. You're dealing with a newborn puppy in social media who's free and easy. And when you get that puppy for Christmas, you think, I can handle it. And then you delve into social media and you realize that that puppy pees all over the place and is uncontrollable. And you're like, how am I going to handle it? And that is your digital landscape, because you also have to deal with the negative. And again, when I talk about platforms and when I talk about understanding data, I mean that in a very practical way, because a sports club will sit and ask us for engagement. Great, I can give you engagement tomorrow. Put something contentious, put something opinionated, put something funny, put whatever you want on, and you will get engagement. But 50% of that engagement will be fans of the other team slagging you off. 50% of that engagement will be fans potentially being racist or politically incorrect. 15% of the engagement will probably be bots. And 10% of that engagement will be banned comments and users. So when you actually remove the negative engagement, the racist engagement, the contentious engagement, so Rangers, whilst I was listening to the first talk, put something up on their Twitter from their manager, and they've got young boys coming up in the Europa League, and their status was, I think we can teach young boys a lesson. I think we can be hard on young boys. I think we can be brutal on young boys. I think we'll teach the young boys a lesson. And of course, that tweet's gone viral, and it may have been intentional. It may have just been stupidity and quickly typed. But based on what I looked at a moment ago and just running the original numbers, about 80% of that engagement was Celtic fans slagging off Rangers. So actually, when a sports club asks for engagement, they don't necessarily want engagement. They want positive engagement. And that's a lot harder to create. So then, as a result of that, you have to know that all content has a purpose. And that purpose isn't just a generic word like engagement. That purpose isn't just something like sales or revenue. You have to think it through a bit more deeply as a sports club because there's consequences. But broadly speaking, you can break down content purposes into these areas. So this is something we did for the NBA. So you can effectively have editorial-based purpose, and it can be to raise something like awareness. And if it was basketball in this case, because we also work with the NBA, it can be about these are something you've not seen before from the past or the present. It can be to grow your knowledge, so that's more analytical. It can be about debate and to actually provoke a response that's a bit more interactive. It can be to drive specifically somebody to your OTT platform or to sign up to something. And fundamentally, it can be to raise money as well. And these are the broad areas that we advise clubs to generate their strategies around. And again, if you're in a business, even a non-sports business, you can still take these top lines here and change the ones up here depending on the needs of your business. So for the MBA, it's awareness, love, and consumption. You may choose other words. And then again, I think the other talk covered this, but these are some of the standard platforms that you deal with. And even though Facebook, a lot of people think is going out of fashion, it's still your biggest just for mass global reach. Google is for video repository, and it's an excellent place for longer content for a sports club and for athlete-led stories. Instagram, as probably you know, is pictures and younger audiences. TikTok, this was a project, by the way, for the Qatar World Cup. TikTok can be about young audiences, and it can be about Asia. Twitter is still for your live games and your immediacy. And Snapchat is often for, in this case, because it was Qatar, a Middle East audience where it's just a lot bigger. But in the UK and in Europe, just a very young audience under the age of 18. It's dying out in that kind of millennial generation. So those are some of the standard platforms you're looking at. And then a standard digital department for a sports club. What's amazing is that Barcelona's, to give you a sort of top-end example, it's basically as big as their actual football squad, which is astonishing because when we took over Barcelona in 2014, it had 6 people in it. And as you can see now, 45 staff, static growth. They're one of the market leaders in digital. You can see some of their initiatives here on the right-hand side, outside of digital, in terms of their content. The overlap between digital at Barcelona and other departments extends into television, extends into IT and their CRM system. It extends into straight sales where there's digital components, and it extends into straight marketing where there's digital shoulder content for obvious things like a new kit launch and so on. So in our strategy for them, we were looking to give them focus and strength, and again, localization and a kind of global footprint beyond just the Spanish. And the 45 breakdown, and this will be sort of standard percentage-wise at any sports club, tends to be in these areas. So the vast majority are still content creators, editors, videographers, journalists, head of digital, and so on. A couple of graphic designers, half a marketeer. It's down as half because they're borrowed from other departments and brought in when they're necessary. And again, my advice to you, if you want to learn from this in a non-sports business or in your sports business, is bridge that gap between marketing and content. because too often, even at big sports clubs, the marketeers brought in and brought out, and then they're at different ends of a massive office. And it's ultimately your marketing department that tends to pay to elevate your digital output. They retain control, and it's then facilitated by an editorial and content-led department. And there's always going to be a slightly fractured relationship. I don't want to tell you to just bring that person into that department, because then we'd be out of a job, because one of the consultancy strengths is to navigate between that and that. But it is just really important, if you don't have the budget for individual consultants to come in, to just know that you're key to digital in pretty much whatever you do. If you want any revenue-based system, or just to improve and gain an audience, is still to have these guys more involved here. And then you have some product people, some CRM people, and some analytics people. Sometimes the people doing the monitoring and the analytics come out of this department. But 45 is quite a big number. Liverpool have got about 30, but clubs like Leicester have only got 5. And again, if you're a smaller business and you're perhaps even thinking of employing a digital specific team, 1 or 2 can make the biggest difference. So then, in terms of takeaways about what we're telling sports clubs specifically and what you can learn and going forwards, some of the things strategically that the market is going to have to adapt to, there's probably just 7 brief things to allude to, and they are as follows. Athletes are becoming media. That's one of the number 1 on the content side that we are telling sports organizations. Athlete-led stories. It doesn't need a voiceover. It doesn't need a narrative. It doesn't have to be that polished. We want to see raw, behind-the-scenes stuff that's told by the athletes. So an athlete grabbing out their phone and literally just doing that, taking a selfie, taking a video. It doesn't matter if it's wonky. It doesn't matter if it doesn't have graphics. That engages really well. So that's number 1. Number 2 is voice is increasing dramatically. We're doing a project at the moment for Amazon, when Alexa, and everything is moving from search in Google to voice in Google to voice in phone to voice in Alexa to voice in Siri. And sports clubs are going to have to determine how they can use voice rather than just text across digital to stay relevant. So with Amazon, when you want to watch the Bundesliga, you go, Alexa, play the Bundesliga, and it comes up on your smart TV. And we're moving into that kind of domain. So that's one to watch over the next 2 to 3 years. Stories and docuseries, again, they're becoming very important. It's still a myth that longer isn't important on certain platforms with lower attention spans or younger audiences, but there's still a market for longer reads, for longer videos. And I think you'll see that with the success specifically of The Athletic, if people are familiar with that. Their whole concept is subscription based on no ads and long reads, and it's working for them at the moment with 80,000 odd followers and close to 50,000 signups, as I understand it, in the space of 3 months since their launch. Number 4 is the return of community. So don't just try and start a group around your brand. Think why people need to connect. And again, over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to have a Twitter that's a lot more filtered around community angles, and TweetDeck already allows football clubs to filter their audience, but that will be reciprocal. And as an audience, more and more, you'll be able to find filters to get the community that you want specifically. Instagram's already got that with the story and then the close friends, and that will develop as well. And other platforms are starting to follow suit. And eventually our prediction is you're going to get things like a Reddit of sport as well, which again allows you to sort of filter out the nonsense and be a lot more specific about the communities that you want to engage in. Number 5 is the breakout year for OTT. We would define this as last year, but this will continue into 2019. La Liga have launched their own OTT platform, and I think other federations and individual clubs will choose to follow suit, and that's going to change the landscape. And again, players across digital domains like DAZN are doing the same. And perversely, for a sports club in this area, it actually helps in England to get relegated. So Newcastle United are one of our clients, and they're a mess. And they're favourites to go down. And they lost actually to my football team, Leicester, 5-0 at the weekend. I always try and get Leicester, by the way, into a presentation at some point. I started by saying we won the Premier League. and we're also doing well now. But with Newcastle, there's a contingency where we know if they go down, they're going to have to downsize digitally, but going down allows them to stream their own championship games because of the dynamic with the EFL compared to the Premier League. So then they may need a strategy for OTT, and perversely, they may actually make more money digitally off that specific component through the OTT service, even though the rest of their digital will be desecrated financially and logistically. So OTT is number 5. Number 6 is interactive versus immersive. We personally think that digital platforms may not become more immersive because by default, specific immersive technology like Intel's TrueView, which you might see on Sky or BT Sport, or 3D technology, it's actually quite isolating because once you put on that 3D headset, what else can you actually do? You can't be on your phone, you can't be talking to friends. So it's cool, but the novelty could potentially wear off. It will be a factor, particularly in analysis during a live game, but there's a difference between immersive and interactive. And interactive borders more on a second screen experience. So whilst you're listening to me, you're tweeting. Whilst you're watching a football game on linear TV, you're on your phone doing something else that complements it. And it's that kind of interaction that we think will take prominence over immersion, even though because of new technology, immersion is sort of the more sexy word to use. And then our final trend, luckily, otherwise I won't have a voice left, is that localizers are winning. And again, that means if you're a sports club, if you're a business, you have to once again think about not just making content, not just retaining an audience, and not just creating opportunities to make money. You have to go a step before that and say, I need a market by market strategy, because if you don't, and you're too generic, even as a big club, it'll work in one place and it will fail everywhere else. And your product, if, for example, you're selling, might be good, but your means to actually engage with that product won't resonate globally, because we're just finding that market by market by market, with so much out there, you have to know exactly what your market wants. And the best example of that is Chelsea, who did their kit launch in the off-season. And based on previous numbers, which confidentiality I can't share, but all of their numbers were up. And yet, oddly, they were down 31% in China. And they couldn't work out why, because historically they'd always done okay in China. But in the last 1 or 2 years in China, and even a little bit before, there's a trend where everyone through their WeChat pays for things, and you can do it through almost all of the apps now. So if you're on social in China, which is nowhere else at the moment, I know there's things like Apple Pay, you don't need to leave to watch a video, to engage with Chelsea, to write something to a friend, to have a conversation, and then to pay for the shirt. And you can actually do all of that within one app at one time. And Chelsea chose not to sell or have any kind of coded facilitation to sell their shirt this off-season through that app. So nobody in China bought it. And the other odd thing about China is they care, bizarrely, less about the players as the mascot. So you had Eden Hazard, who didn't resonate when he was at Chelsea that well, but you tweet something from the mascot at Chelsea and it goes viral, because they're sort of slightly mental about the quirky. And as a consequence, had they used the mascot to promote the kit, we advised them it would also sell better. So localization is also key. I'm sorry if I've rambled on, but that's about it. And thanks for listening.